Okay, everybody, welcome to this program from Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. We're happy to have you here on this Tuesday morning. For those of you who have not been to our museum before, we are located in Pan Pacific Park, and you can see us on my backdrop right now. We are the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States, and the survivors who founded our museum mandated that admission should always be free and that we always have a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire the future generations. Today, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Michele Rodri, a Holocaust survivor from France. And joining us today, aside from the public, we have three schools: Prairie Vista Middle School, Lakeview Leadership Academy, and Tarzana Elementary. We're so happy to have you here today. So Michele will share her story with you. And during or after, you can type in questions in the Q&A. Students can use the Q&A box on Zoom, and public watching on Facebook, you can type it in the comments. And after Michele shares her story, she will answer questions. So Michele, we are so honored to have you here today. And without further ado, I'll hand it to you.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak to you, students, like you were in front of me, but I imagine that you are a wonderful group and very attentive to the story. I understand that most of you are aware of what the Holocaust was, the Second World War too, and in Europe, mostly, yes, in Europe. I was born in Paris, France, and I came from a family of Orthodox people, Jewish Orthodox people. My parents were very involved in Jewish life, and they gave us, my brothers and I, good values by which I'm happy to say I'm living today. I had three brothers, and I was the baby. I was the youngest child. The difference between my oldest brother and myself was 14 years. And then my three brothers were 18 months apart. My youngest brother was 17 years old, Maurice, when he was going to high school. And then one day, that horrible day, it was raining. Usually he would walk to school, but because it was raining, he took the subway in Paris. And unfortunately, that day, there was a razzia in the subway. And the Nazis came in, and they just asked everybody to show their identification, and also that men dropped their pants, because in those days, today it isn't the same, because today some people get circumcised, some young men get circumcised for health reasons, but in the Jewish religion, boys get circumcised on the 8th day of being born. And my brother was unfortunately taken away with other people in the whole subway station, and my brother never came back. He perished at the age of 17 in Auschwitz. I feel that every day of my life I think about him, and I feel that his life was not a life of a young man, because I am blessed to have a 21-year-old grandson who has a life that is wonderful. He can go out, he is free, he has everything that we can give him. And he has a wonderful life as a young man. And my brother didn't have that. I am sure that at 17 years old, coming from an Orthodox family, he didn't even kiss a girl on the cheek, leave alone going out with her to a movie or dance or whatever. So forward, my two other brothers, when this happened, decided to go into the French underground. And the French underground was called the Maquis. It was under the leadership of General de Gaulle, who later on became the president of France. And he liberated France on the right, on the French side. My two brothers were then in the mountains, in the Alps, and their job was to blow up trains coming from Germany with ammunitions. So that was their task. My oldest brother was a man who was fearless, and he spoke several languages, but at home we spoke several languages, and he spoke particularly very well German, which is Hochdeutsch, which is the literary German. Because my mother was from Krakow, with my father also, and that was in Poland, but the government switched. So sometimes it was Poland, sometimes it was Austria. And when it became Austria, my parents spoke Hoch German. And my oldest brother spoke it perfectly. So when I was 7 years old, when I was playing hopscotch in front of my parents' house with three of my friends who were not Jewish, and I was wearing the Star of David on my clothing because it was mandatory for everyone, every Jew, to wear the star. And I felt like, at a young age, I felt like I was branded. And I was not ashamed of being Jewish. In the contrary, I was proud of it. But I felt very, very ashamed of the fact that I had to wear a star and that everybody was looking at me like I was something different than any other person. I was playing hopscotch and the Nazis stopped. All of a sudden, an SS truck stopped right on the corner of the street where we were playing, the three of us, and three friends and myself. And two soldiers came out and looked at our clothing. And on my clothing was the Star of David. So they picked me up and threw me into the truck. When I say threw me in, they took me like a sack of potatoes and just threw me in to that truck. At that moment, my life changed completely, because a few minutes before I started to play with my friends, I had breakfast with my father and mother in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, I was separated from my parents, not knowing where I was going, what I was going to do, what was going to happen to my parents or myself. They took me to Drancy. Drancy was a triage camp. A triage camp is a separation camp. It's a camp where from there, the Germans came in and made the decision where these people were going, the men on one side, the women on the other side, the children on the other side. And then were distributed in different camps. So that was a triage camp. Every day they came in, twice a day. They came in with dogs barking. The dogs were barking. I don't know who was barking louder, the soldiers or the dogs, because the soldiers never spoke to us. They just barked to scare us and to take away our dignity. We were treated really very, very badly, with no respect at all for the human being. I was there for 3 months. I was lucky not to be sent to any concentration camp in those 3 months. One day, the camp opened up for a soldier came in And my brother was with this soldier, dressed in a German uniform, in a captain's German uniform. He came straight down the aisle with this man, this Nazi. He was an SS man. And my brother, in an imperative way, he looked at me and I looked at him, and I knew at this moment that I was not supposed to react or to come to him or to talk to him, to make like I don't know him, which I did. And he said to this SS man, I want these two children to come with me immediately, pointing to me and another little girl who was standing next to me. That little girl was 5.5 years old. She was the daughter of a war prisoner, a political prisoner. Her father was against the regime of what was going on in Europe. Later on, he was shot. So we went, the soldier escorted us to the car, to my brother's car. And my brother had a car with a chauffeur, with a driver, because he was in the underground. And we drove away. And before we drove away, ironically enough, he saluted my brother, and he said to him, thank you so much for coming, in German. We got into the car. My brother was sitting in the front because he had a driver, and I was sitting in the back with my little friend. And we drove for many kilometers without talking. I think that my brother couldn't believe that he pulled it off and that we were safe in the car. So we drove quite a few hours. It was about 7, 8 hours, maybe 6 or 7 hours, to the center of France. When my brother turned around to me and he said, I'm going to take you to safety. He hugged me, and I knew I was safe with him. He took me to safety, and it was in the middle of France, near Grenoble. And it was in a convent. He took me into a convent where the Mother Superior agreed to take me in with my little friend. And she spoke to me and said that here you will be safe. Nobody will know that you are Jewish. You are not to reveal your identity. I will take care of you, but do not speak to other children about your religion or where you're coming from or anything like this. So I didn't. She was a wonderful woman. She was the head of the convent, the Mother Superior. And she was taking care of me. She used to take me to school every morning and then out of the convent, and then picked me up every day, and was very kind and made sure that I had as much as she could give me. I came back every day from school learning, and I couldn't talk to anybody in class. I was afraid to betray myself by saying something maybe that would reveal that I was Jewish. I had to hide my identity. So I didn't make any friends, and I was studying all the time. It turned out to be that I was the best student in the class because I had no way to talk to anyone. Came back to the convent, and then one day the nurse said, the nun said to me, there is a lot of talk in the city that the Germans are coming around looking for children in religious institutions. So she says it's not safe for you to be here. So I'm going to take you to the forest for a couple of days, and then I'll bring you back. I'll come and take you back. So in her haste and being in a hurry to go and take me to the forest, she forgot to take anything from me but a blanket. And it was just a little chintzy blanket. Anyway, I was there for 3 days, and I was scared to death as a child, being alone in the forest, nothing to eat, nothing to drink, She didn't take anything with her. She didn't mean anything by it, but she was in a hurry. So she says, you stay in this place and I'll come back for you. And 3 days seemed like a very, very long time. I must have had a temperature because I ate things that I could find, which were little strawberries and things like this that were wild and of course not washed. And they were probably not ripe. I don't remember, but I got very sick. I had some kind of a bug in my stomach. Anyway, she came back. Oh, and I dreamt in the middle of the night that there were lions around me. But it was, I must have had a fever. It was actually just little rabbits running around. And then she was an angel, actually. She came back and picked me up, took me back to the convent. At that point, I think my oldest brother must have kept in touch with her. And he decided that I should be moved to a family. There was a family several families in Europe did the right thing by hiding peoples, but particularly Jewish children, from the Germans. They would hide them for a price, or sometimes they did it just out of the goodness of their heart to take care of those kids. The family where I was taken to was actually very anti-Semitic. Of course, my father didn't know about it, or my brother, but meaning well, my father paid more than was asked for, and therefore I was treated worse than anything. And I was with my little friend. I took her everywhere with me. And then we were there for 14 months. After that, when I was there, it was really very, very bad time. I was mistreated. I was beaten for no reason. If I broke it, I never did anything at home. I was only 7.5 years old when I left home. Here in this house, I had to wash and dry dishes, and I didn't know how. When I dropped dishes, I would get beaten for nothing, really mistreated. Then one day, we were having lunch, and we only had communications with the outside world through radio, because of course there was no television or anything like this in those days. So we were having lunch, and then suddenly we heard the news, and we heard the Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, who detested and hated actually Hitler politically, and said, Mr. Hitler, in a sarcastic way, he said, capitulated, and had to capitulate it, and now the American troops are in the outskirts of Paris to liberate France. At that time, I thought I couldn't believe what I heard, really. And I heard the people who were hiding me talking about it, that it was going to be now the end of the war, and that everything was going to go back to normal. At that point, I felt that I had hope that my parents would be alive and that I was going to be reunited. So my parents came 3 days or 4 days later with my two brothers who were in the underground. Of course, my third brother wasn't there. And until this day, I don't know how my parents told me that he was deported and that he perished in Auschwitz. We drove back to Paris through the Champs-Élysées, which is the biggest avenue of Paris and the most beautiful one. When the war broke out, the German army came in and draped all the buildings of the Champs-Élysées on both sides, from the ceiling, from the top of the buildings to the ground. Huge flags, red flags, blood red flags with the swastika, big black swastika. And it was at the time when I saw that, I thought that it was a rape to my country, that they came in and just took over and threw out people from their homes and just monopolized everything that they could. Now, fast forward, the liberation came with the American troops, and all the flags were gone. And the only flags that were flying over the buildings were the American flag and the French flag. And it was something that I will never forget, how the American tanks drove down from the Arc de Triomphe, the top of the Champs-Élysées, all the way to the bottom. And it was a sight I will never forget. And I must say that at that age, by that time, I was 10 and a half. Every soldier that I saw coming out of those tanks was more handsome than the other one. I could appreciate a handsome soldier. And they were throwing juicy fruit gum and calling out for Jewish children. And they were so kind to everyone. I must say that if it wasn't for the American army liberating France, today we would be speaking German instead of French in France and different parts of France. So they were my heroes. So we drove back. I was home. And I was looking for my brother because I didn't know where he was, my youngest brother. And he was the youngest in age with me. So he used to play hide and seek with me, and I was looking everywhere for him, and of course he wasn't there. Until this day, I don't know how my parents told me it was. I must have blocked it out in my mind. My life started again. I went back to school and met my 3 friends, and then I was going to school, and my brother David went came to Los Angeles because he was a very good dancer, and he thought that Hollywood was waiting for him. So he came to Los Angeles thinking that Hollywood was waiting for him, but he was disappointed, but he remained here, and he opened up a dancing school. He came back to Paris to visit the family, and he asked my father if he could take me to the United States to see how what California looks like. And my father agreed, and I came and stayed with my brother. And then I fell in love, married, never went back. Married an American, New York, nice, wonderful dancer also. And I was very fortunate. I got a beautiful child out of this marriage, who is the love of my life, my son Kirk. We were married for a while, and then things didn't work out, so we got separated and divorced, and then I married another man who became my son's second dad, who was coincidentally also a survivor. He was a survivor of Bergen-Belsen because he was born in Holland. He was Dutch. And my life continued. Excuse me, I need to take a sip of water. And my husband and I became very good citizens of the United States. My husband loved this country. I think he was a better citizen than a born American, because he used to complain about the country and then he would praise it. He loved this country. We were married for 47 years and he passed away. 16 years ago, and my life is just wonderful in this country, and I love this country very, very much. So this is my story. I'm up to questions if you have any. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Michele, for sharing your story with us. We do have a few questions. First one is, before you were taken to Drancy, when you were playing with your friends, were any of them not Jewish? And if so, did they say anything? Did they ever, your non-Jewish friends, comment about the star you were wearing?
No, never. They never commented about that because I was going to school with them. And there were other children, excuse me, there were other children in the school, Jewish children who had the star. And they knew that if they saw someone with a Jewish star, they knew that it was imperative for us to wear it.
What happened to the other little girl who was with you? Who you mentioned?
We stayed friends for a very long time. And she got married. She was liberated. When we were liberated, she married later on, she was going to Canada, and she married a Canadian man, and became an oral surgeon. We were in touch for many, many years until she passed away. Her father was shot.
And were you in touch with any other of your friends from childhood in Paris?
You mean not from the hiding place? No.
No, from before the war started.
Oh yes. Yes, well, I was just a very young girl at the time, but I had friends later on in middle school and in high school, of course.
And how did your parents survive, and as well as your other brothers who survived?
Well, my two brothers survived because they were in the French underground. My parents were fortunate that we had a friend who was a friend of my father, who was the chief of police of the area where we lived. Each section in Paris has a different chief of police. And this man came in and barricaded the house and where we lived. And he said that he was going to take care of my parents and bring food on the black market to them so that they shouldn't go out. So they didn't go out of the house really unless they went out in the backyard at night. But the electricity was cut off so that the Germans wouldn't see that there is an electrical bill, because if there is an electrical bill, someone is living there in that house. So he risked his life actually for saving my parents.
And I know that you mentioned it, but just because some of the students who are watching I don't think are that familiar with this, can you just explain a little bit more what the underground was and how they operated against Nazi Germany?
Well, the underground was a group of French citizens who were against the regime, against the fact that France was collaborating. Some of the French people and the government were collaborating with the Germans, and they wanted to fight for their country. So they created a group. The leader was General de Gaulle, and General de Gaulle was the one who created the FFI, which was the French underground. And they were fighting. Their job was to go and destroy anything that was brought in from Germany in guns, tanks, or whatever. But my two brothers were in the mountains, in the Alps, and then they moved to Annecy, which was also another mountain, which is a ski resort. And this is where they were hiding, and snipers, they were actually terrorists, you know.
Do you know roughly how many members of your extended family you lost?
80. My parents, my father he was one of 6 brothers. My mother had 4 sisters. Everybody was married and extended families. The last Seder, which was a Passover Seder, the house was full of tables, and I think we were 34 or something like this. And when we came back, the first Seder that we had, we were 8 people at the table.
So that reminds me, you talk about the having a Seder, the Passover Seder, probably about the year before you went into hiding. You told me that you remember I believe your father telling you that Jews do not kneel in Yiddish at that Seder. Can you talk about that and what the impact that had on your time in hiding?
Yes. My father was very stern that evening. He was what is called leading the Seder. He was telling the story of Passover, and we were all participants, of course. We took part of it. And at one point, one of his brothers, I think it was the youngest brother, my uncle asked my father a question, and my father very, very imperatively said, "A Jew never kneels." And in my little head, when my father said something, it was like, when E.F. Hutton speaks, I was listening. I had deep respect for my father, and no fear, but respect. So I took it very seriously. And it created for me, of course, my father didn't know that this was going to make an impact on me and to such a point, but it created for me problems because I was in the convent and I was singing, and I had a beautiful voice when I was a child. Today, a singing voice, today, if I sing, it starts raining outside. But at the time, I had a beautiful voice, and when I walked into the church, I was supposed to kneel, and I wouldn't. And the nuns were saying, "You need to kneel," and I said, "No, I won't." But they didn't know that I was Jewish, only the Mother Superior, so I was not punished, but I was scolded. The Mother Superior just usually used to come over and take me away and made it's okay, go to the choir. And I was singing. So it made an impact on me at that point. And then I decided that in my life, if I ever am blessed to have children, I will be very careful what I say to them, because they may carry that the rest of their life. So I think I did that, raising my son.
And did you ever tell your father that had such an impact on you, what he had said?
No, I wouldn't hurt him. He would have been devastated knowing that I was hurt because of that. But you know, I must say that the war made me grow up very quickly. I was very cautious what I would say.
When you were in the forest, how did you manage to survive? Do you remember any details about that?
No, I only remember that I was hungry, and then after a while, I was drinking the you know, I don't know what it is called in English, when in the middle of the morning, the leaves become with some water on it. What do you call that?
I know what you're referring, condensation or something like, I know what you're referring to, I think.
So there was some water and some
Right,
moisture, so
water.
I would lick the leaves from it, but after a while, you're not hungry anymore.
And did you have any shelter at all? Were you maybe under a tree or
It
something?
was, no, it was the middle of the summer. It was very, very warm. And actually being in the forest was welcome because it was cooler.
So going back again to before the war, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, maybe some anecdotes you remember, things you, especially being the youngest of four children, anything you remember doing at home for fun?
I can only say that I was spoiled rotten by my parents as well as my three brothers. I was the baby and I was really spoiled, but I was spoiled in a nice way. I was not a brat. I remember my parents took care of me in a way that I knew I was not a brat. But I remember that we had a beautiful life and mostly around the family. And it was a warm, very warm atmosphere at home. There was no, if anybody needed anything, we were there for them. It was a very welcoming home. Everything was going on in my house because my mother was the best cook. And food is very important in Jewish life. Everything goes around the table. You know, we break the bread, and my aunt was living with us. My mother's sister was living with us, and she was the best baker, and we had lots of company all the time. And we used to go out, my parents and I, every Sunday. We would go to different, sometimes to a theater, sometimes to a cafe. There were some cafes that had shows in the afternoon for children, and we could have like coffee or hot chocolate for kids and a tray of pastries and things like this. But life in general was extremely close knit with the family. It was beautiful. We had a beautiful life in France. France was a beautiful country to live in, very cultured, and it was just a beautiful life until the invasion.
And afterwards, your family, your immediate family stayed in France for the rest of their lives, right?
Yes, except my brother David, who came, like I said, here, and then he went back to Paris because my father fell and broke his leg. So he went back to Paris to take care of things in the family. But my other brother remained in Paris. They were very strong French citizens, and they loved the life in Paris.
And how often would you go to Paris to visit them?
I would, when I was married to my second husband, I went sometimes every other year. Sometimes my husband went, we went together. Sometimes I went by myself. Then when my father passed away and my mother was alone at home, but my brothers were living there and close by, I used to go every 6 months, twice a year, spend 3-4 weeks with my mom.
And on a sort of related question, you mentioned how your family really loved Paris. Do you agree with the sources that say overall the French were very helpful and active with the resistance? Were helpful and active in helping the Nazis round up Jews?
There were some people who were big collaborators, yes. After the war, when the war was over, they were very badly punished by the public, who resented the fact that that they let them come into the country and just rape the country, so to speak, in many ways, you know, took away our liberty and were just inhumane to most of the people. And you know, like in every country, I suppose, politically, you don't agree with whatever goes on, and then there is payoffs, and you know, and it depends on the character of the people, the decency of the human being.
When your family returned to Paris, were they able to get their home back?
Yes, they did. They never left the house, you know. So they could reopen everything, and it was fine. And the neighborhood used to celebrated them because they were alive. They were good citizens and good neighbors.
What languages do you speak now?
Barely English. I speak Yiddish fluently. I speak German. I know German. I don't speak it, but I know German. And I speak a little Italian. I get along with it. Understand a little Hebrew. Dutch. I actually speak Dutch too. Not like a Dutch person, you know, with a French accent. But I can make myself understood.
And of course, you speak French as well.
Yeah, French is my main language.
So when you were in hiding, what were things that you used to keep on to not lose hope?
I was in direct contact in my mind with God. I was in connection with God every day. I was praying to God, like not in Hebrew but mostly in Yiddish, in my own way, and I knew that God was with me. I'm a strong believer.
When your son was growing up, and then later, when you had a grandchild, did you talk about your experiences to your family, and did your husband talk about them as well?
My husband talked about it very little. I talked about it very little too. My husband and I, when we got together and we got married, we both decided that we were not going to be victims. We're going to be survivors. And the Holocaust never created a problem in our lives. And we didn't want to have my son. I don't think my son was a victim of it, because we just talked about it as a matter of fact without the drama of it.
And so what made you start speaking publicly about your experiences?
Well, first of all, my children, my son, my daughter-in-law, I couldn't think of the word in English. My daughter-in-law pushed me a lot to talk. She said, you should tell the story. And it never came up, actually. And then one day, my grandson was going to Hebrew school. And he was talking about the Holocaust. And he asked, I think the subject came up that, what is the Holocaust? And I think my son said, or maybe my daughter said, ask grandma, she knows. And then I told him, but I tried to be very careful not to shock him. And then later on, I spoke in the synagogue at Stephen Weiss in front of the students. And from there on, there were a lot of people who wanted me to tell the story, and then I got involved with the museum and different schools, and got involved with you, Michael, and and I think it is important for me to talk about it because it's something that should never be forgotten as a history. Lots of lessons to be learned from.
Yes, and that's why we're so happy to have you be a part of our museum, and to speak to people. Even when we're closed, we can have you do it virtually this way.
Thank you.
Michele, this is a question from me. Can you please share with the audience how you met your second husband?
No, I won't.
Okay.
Not today.
Okay.
Not today.
What message would you like to share with students who are listening to you today?
Well, the message that I would like to leave is, because you listen to my story and you're learning about the Holocaust, I think it is important that if you see something that is wrong, like if you see a friend of yours who gets mistreated by another person, you need to help that person or go for help, and don't turn your head away. It's very important that you participate and take care of this that you know is wrong, and in your heart you know it's wrong. Then you do something, because if you do not do anything, you are as guilty as the predator, I feel. So I know that young people have a big heart and a healthy heart and a good mind, and you know what is wrong. You know not to do the wrong thing. And I trust that the youth will carry on this. We need that. We live in a world where there's a lot of meanness going on, and we have to eradicate that. So we count on you. You are the future. That's what I can say to them. And thank you for listening. And I hope that you get something out of this conversation.
So thank you so much, Michele. And before we sign off, I just want to let you know that we have people watching this from Italy, Canada, Texas, Michigan, Washington, D.C., New York, and of course, California. So one of the benefits of being able to do it this way is that we can reach a very wide audience. So
that's great.
and we thank you very much. And we have a lot of comments just thanking you for your story, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
And before we sign off, I want to let everybody know that while the museum is closed, we will continue to provide content like today's program that you can access from home. Next Tuesday, June 2nd at 11 a.m., we will host a discussion with HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, 30 years after, and UCLA's Leave Center about how Jewish refugees shaped Los Angeles. And on Thursday, June 4th at 11 a.m., join us for a discussion with the children of Stefania Podgorska, who is a Polish Catholic teenager, saved the lives of 13 Jews by hiding them in her attic. You can find more information about our virtual events and our Facebook page on our website, and of course on our Facebook page. Our website is www.lamoth.org. Thank you so much again to Michele and for everyone for watching. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. And again,
everybody stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.